Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of the Viking Chats, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Simon Bones of Genous. Simon, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
We haven't met before. We actually got introduced via a mutual acquaintance. So for those who haven't come across you or indeed Genous before, do you want to just give us a little bit of a blow of kind of your journey to date, and then give us kind of a high view of what Genous is?
Sure. Well, actually, I'll start with just very briefly what Genous is. So we're a retrofit firm, so we help improve the efficiency of people's houses or flats, mostly houses. But I used to do totally different things. So I started after I left university as a management consultant. So sacking people, putting prices up, doing all the stuff that everybody hates.
The devil's work.
The devil's work, quite lucrative, the devil's work.
Yeah.
But worked in a couple of different places, helped start my own firm with some other people, grew that, ran it.
Was that Credo, the consultancy
yes,
firm?
Yeah, cool Credo. And sold that in 2017 to a US company called Teneo. Stayed there for another 3 years and then left. And while I was a consultant, most of my work was in kind of energy services, property services, building services, infrastructure services, kind of anything to do with guys in vans, basically. I left and kind of thought, well, probably too young to retire. My wife told me I had to get another job, actually. I did also retire in COVID.
It's a common story. Either the partner or it's just someone getting bored at home and being like, yeah, sitting around doing nothing all day isn't quite as exciting as I thought it might be.
Yeah, I mean, my problem was I retired in 2020 and I wasn't allowed to leave the building because we were in COVID. So the kind of jet off to foreign place is like, you can't do that. So anyway, I had long had an interest in climate change since kind of about turn of the millennium. And so on the one hand, kind of went into academia a bit, and I've stopped now, but I think I've still got it on my LinkedIn. I should take it off. I was a visiting research fellow in climate change science at University of Bristol. Published some stuff on effectively why rich people have destroyed the planet, and didn't want to become an academic full time. It's not for me, and
wanted to put it into practical.
Well, the thing is, I'd fixed up 3 properties myself, 2 that I'd lived in and one that my brother, who's disabled, had to adapt his flat, and took the opportunity to do some energy efficiency stuff to it as well, put in a heat pump and insulation and all those kind of things. And found that process all 3 times incredibly painful, for all sorts of reasons, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, well, I understand how you can build a good business that does energy services, property services, building services. I know how you run field teams, and I know a bit about tech. So because I'd also run a startup back in 2000, first .com boom, raised £1 million, spent it, closed it down. Wasn't a great success, but interesting. At least closed it down solvent.
That's quite rare.
Yeah. So decided to go and do something similar. So Genous, as I said, is a retrofit business. So without kind of labouring it too much, when I did some research, because I'm a consultant, so of course I went and did some market research. I mean, it's not rocket science, but there are 3 things that people generally struggle with in making their homes more energy efficient. They, first of all, don't know what to do.
Yeah.
They don't know what's actually green, will actually save them money, anything like that. So they don't have knowledge gap. Secondly, they don't know how to get it done. Where do you go? Because there aren't big brand names that do this kind of stuff, and people are effectively builders, and so most people think they're unreliable. And then, of course, third is it's really expensive to do. So most people don't have the money for it. And I wasn't trying to solve the third problem, though. Hopefully I'll be able to announce something in the next month or so that does. But our aim was to say, right, we can build an advisory capability that is based around tech, because you can't do this by just talking to people on the telephone, that can help people to understand what they can do. Yeah. And then a delivery business that gets it done painlessly, whether that is cavity wall insulation or solar panels or a heat pump or all 3, because no one actually can do that except in what's called the eco space, which is the government policy that they've just canned, and which finishes the end of March.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty and disruption in this kind of space at the moment, or confusion really coming down from government.
Yeah, I mean, they published the Warm Homes Plan a couple of weeks ago, which is the kind of flagship document. As I'm sure we'll talk about, there's a consultation response on minimum energy efficiency standards for landlords. They are planning to announce, or they have announced that there'll be some price cuts to utilities, but they haven't said how that will fall yet. They've talked about loans, they've talked about other things. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but for, I don't think it was probably 15 years, I don't actually know, but ECO was the main programme, which is energy company obligations. So effectively British Gas, Octopus, whatever, they all had to pay a certain amount of money to get what is termed fuel poor, low income or vulnerable customers. So essentially poor people in poor quality housing, it would be fully funded. That would all get fixed for them. And that was running at $1 billion something a year, and they announced in November or October in the budget, it's gone from March. So a number of companies have gone into administration, and that it doesn't affect us because we didn't do that. We're able to pay, so, which is a terrible phrase, but you have to be able to fund it, otherwise we don't do it. But that market has been really decimated, and obviously at the same time,
it's always the challenge with anything underpinned by a major government approach or strategy like that, isn't it? The moment they kind of repeal it.
Yeah. So and we've seen that before in things like apprenticeships and other spaces and PFI where certain things were done. I think the specific challenge here for the future is that if you look at what the Warm Homes Plan talks about, it's all about skilling up a new generation of people to go into green jobs and how great those green jobs will be. At the same time, there are 64 people in Cardiff, I think, from a company that I won't name, but it's public domain, that went into administration that lost their jobs overnight. Yeah.
And
they were green jobs. So why would I'm thankfully not a teenager.
And I think interesting politically, there's obviously a lot of debate about this with the major parties and the kind of the newer challenger parties at the moment. You're obviously getting two very different messages at the moment from Reform and the Greens two very different approaches. But I think it's something really interesting you say there. I mean, there was I think it was Richard Tice who was talking on the news or being interviewed the other day, and he was talking about how a lot of their stance is to repeal a lot of this net zero and environmental objectives or targets, whatever you want to call them. And a really interesting question raised in that was, so what happens to all the jobs in this sector? This has been a rapidly expanding sector. And I think, regardless of the conversation around it, I think that was a really interesting point that was put to them, and I don't think they had any sort of an answer for it other than they'll find other jobs. They'll find other jobs.
Well, I mean, and that tends to be how government thinks about things until they have to say, oh well, we're going to produce an employment strategy, and then it suddenly becomes something that they care about. But I mean, to be fair, the objection raised specifically to Eco was that it wasn't good value for money and it delivered some poor quality stuff. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that.
Yeah.
So we didn't do it. Part of the reason we didn't do it is because that business has been procured to a price basis or a cost basis. So you win if you're cheaper than everybody else.
Yeah.
If you're pushier than everybody else, if you're say a little bit more aggressive than everyone else, there are three types of cavity wall insulation, but the one that's often used in Eco is £1 a square metre cheaper than the other one, which is much better. So why would you put something into someone's home that isn't good, if it gets damp, it stays damp kind of forever, for £1 a square metre? Well, the answer is because the people procuring that were only interested in the cheapest thing. If you want to buy a laptop or a mobile phone,
and it's in many ways like you could equate that to the cladding scandal we've got going on. I mean, a very similar thing. Builders, a lot of developers knew it wasn't the greatest material in the world, but it met the government framework, it met building regs, but a lot of them knew it was crap, but it was cheap. And it got used.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't purport to say that I know what people know, but I think it is generally the case that no one in that market particularly cared about the quality. And I got lots of people who came to me saying, I've had this eco stuff done, my house is a mess, can you fix it? To which, unfortunately, the answer was no, we can't. It's not what we do. But typically they would be told. I remember talking to a lady and she said, they just told me what I was having and I could either have it or I couldn't. And if I wanted it, it was their spec, it was their whatever, they were doing it how they wanted to do it. Because they'd done the calculation. The way eco worked was you got paid based on, I think it was actual bill savings, which weren't actually actual bill savings, but it was a kind of notional calculation. Yeah. So someone would work out the best way for me to make money versus what it costs is to give you this mix of stuff.
Yeah.
Again, that's not what people want. What people want is to be able to say, you might tell me that that's great, but I don't want it. I want this, and I've got a good reason for it, or I've got a bad reason for it. It doesn't really matter, but that's what I want.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you get into things that are government funded, technically eco was funded by the energy companies, but just was itself a stupid thing because it meant it came onto our bills, and energy bills are incredibly regressive, so they're a much higher proportion of poor people's income than income tax. So
they're insane enough as they are, but a lot of them are put onto pay-as-you-go meters, which exasperate the situation because they're usually even higher tariffs.
Yep. But even if you, pay-as-you-go is a separate challenge and all locked up with smart meters and so on, which I won't go to right now. But but even if you, I think currently Nesta has the numbers, but it's something like 18% of an electricity bill is policy costs, as they're called.
Wow.
Now that's what Tice, who by the way I can't stand, and you don't have to edit that one out. I just
not a fan. Not a fan. I just bring it up because I just think it's an interesting debate at the moment, and because we deal a lot in the residential space, and obviously particularly landlords and letting agents are a huge part of our audience. MEES has been, minimum energy efficiency standards, has been a very confused message within our sector for about the last 5, 6, 7 years. The goalposts keep getting moved.
Yep.
Not helped by, like I said, recent statements by Reform about not only their general attitude to energy efficiency and green policies, but also, we've got this huge legislation going through this year called the Renters' Rights Act, which is the biggest legislative change in our industry for 50 plus years. Mm-hmm. And they announced the other day that if they come in, they're going to repeal it all. Like that helps anyone, but the trouble is it just causes more confusion. It causes more people to delay what they're doing. It means that the kind of rogue element or the kind of worst performing element, it kind of gives them an excuse to try and cling on and keep trying to do what they do and hope they get away with it until hopefully they're not required to do it anymore. So I just kind of bring it up just more as a...
I understood. And I think, MEES is interesting because actually it is, while landlords probably don't like it, it's quite hard politically to unwind it because it doesn't cost the taxpayer anything. The thing about the 17%, whether it is large schemes for the fuel poor, low income and vulnerable, which is actually where most of that money comes from. It's not net zero. It's helping poor people not to freeze to death.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the best way, but that is where most of that money goes. It should be on general taxation. It shouldn't be on energy bills. But if you look at saying, right, we're not going to subsidise poor people getting their homes improved by 2 billion quid, well, you can do that. That reduces costs. If you say, I'm going to allow landlords to not improve their properties that they'd have to pay for, technically under the new rules, there's going to be some tax deductions. So there is a little bit of cost associated with it, but not much. Actually, I think that's a harder thing for Reform to say, unless they are prepared to say, which
like
they might.
It's not a government tax,
and unless it's like, well, we are voted for by landlords and not by renters. In which case, you could argue that point, but it's not a cost. One could argue whether it's the right, as you say, the goalposts have moved. Are the goalposts in the right place? Are they structured in the right way? Is it sensible? Is the timing fair? is the incentive there? But I think there's a mix of, unfortunately, in any industry, good landlords who generally have decent properties, but they might be EPCD, not EPCC, and they're going, well, hang on, this really hits me. And then there are some people with renting properties that you just think that shouldn't be allowed. And
I think the challenge always is as well. It's and look, obviously a challenge for a government, but they often talk about a the PRS or the rental sector, or whatever you want to call it, as if it is some sort of single entity, as if, as if a challenge faced by a landlord in Mayfair is the same as the challenge faced by a landlord in Pontypool is the same as a landlord in the Scottish Highlands. And they're absolutely not. So I think that's really interesting there. I believe the spend cap, because they reduced the spend cap, didn't they, for landlords? I think they reduced
10,000.
it to 10,000.
So they were consultation suggested 15, and they've moved it to 10. Yeah, but you have to spend that 10 even if you're above it. Whereas I believe for the 3,000 that there's currently for EPCE, I believe you could get an exemption that said it was too expensive. I don't think you had to spend that money. But the rules on this, as they're scheduled, is if you're, let's say, EPCE, and it's going to cost you 15,000 to get to EPCC, you have to spend the first 10.
Yeah.
And then that exempts you from spending that for another decade.
Yeah.
But you still have to spend it. You can't just say, well, my property's too difficult. You have to do what you can.
Yeah. I think it's gonna be really interesting because I mean London is fascinating. Obviously, I'm kind of ignoring the new builds from kind of 2000 because most of those or all of them should meet that requirement. But I think obviously we've got a lot of period conversion flats, things like that. But a lot of what can and cannot be done is dictated by the head lease and the freeholder. So it's going to be really interesting to see how much can actually be done on some of these with the restrictions, because a leaseholder ultimately can't do anything outside of what is permitted under the terms of their ownership. Yeah,
so I think that there are some exemptions in the MEES consultation response, which I have read, but I confess not in the last however long. So there are some restrictions that if you can't do something or your tenants won't allow you to do something, then you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
And I suspect there will be some people whose...
Then you've got other caveats, listed buildings, conservation areas, etc., whatever is permitted.
And I suspect some tenants will be encouraged to say they don't want certain things doing. And I suspect some freeholders will quite happily agree that they don't want something doing for stuff. But I think for the most part, I mean, there are an awful lot of properties. So whether it's, I think it's 2 point something million that are below EPCC, and that could be anything from I've got 68 points out of 100 and EPCC starts at 69. So you put a £200 Google Nest thermostat in the hallway.
Job done.
Call the EPC guys back for another £100. Make sure that they mark it as Appendix Q, which is what they have to do on it. And then suddenly you pass through to people who've got, electric storage heaters or LPG, or really big boilers and heat pumps, which we'll probably talk about at some point. But and standard unit only goes up to 15.5 kilowatts, and a simple combi boiler is 28 kilowatts. So that's mainly because it's doing the hot water heating. But gas is like an airplane. You just pump more gas through it.
But I think what's really interesting, actually, it was after we'd kind of had our online intro and you'd booked in, I actually had a landlord call in a bit of a mad panic because of the latest kind of update on MEES. And I think your product is kind of positioned really well at this moment in time in terms of what I'm finding at the moment is focusing on landlords. What they really want to understand at the moment, as you've just highlighted there is so much scope of what can and can't be done. I think for most landlords, it's about starting to gain some clarity on that. So I had a landlord call us up the other day who was panicking that this legislation was instant.
Yep.
And it applied now, and he was like, oh my God, I don't... he's got 2 flats, and and I was like, first of all, calm down. It's 2030.
Yep, and October 2030.
Yeah, and we're not ones to advocate for leaving things to the last minute. Our industry, quite often landlords, especially, don't like to spend money before they have to. And I think also there have been some that have had their fingers, or they've read stories of earlier MEES legislation where landlords have had their fingers burnt somewhat. Mm-hmm. I specifically recall reading an article in Times Property about a year or so ago, maybe a couple of years ago now, and it was a landlord with quite an extensive portfolio who'd done £1 million worth of improvements across the whole portfolio to improve the energy efficiency. but because they then change the goalposts of what would apply in the future, that investment will no longer apply to the latest version of that legislation.
Yep.
And so I think that's one of the problems that we've got, is that there are these cautionary tales. There are these people who've got burnt by being proactive, which is what ultimately we want landlords and their managing agents to be. But at the same time, it's helping them get prepared. So the conversation I had with the landlord the other day is really start now, going through the process of understanding, as we've just discussed, what can be done.
Yep.
Just generally from an energy efficiency basis, and then obviously looking at your type of property, what's permitted, any restrictions, etc. Then understand the cost framework of implementing that, and obviously what would actually materially be involved in actually delivering whatever those changes are. And then obviously from that, they can then develop some sort of financial plan in terms of how that's going to be funded, but also have quite a realistic expectation of what that will mean if those works need to take place whilst there is a tenant in situ, again, as you've mentioned, so that there can be total clarity with the tenant of, look, happy to do this, but just so you're clear, the house is going to become uninhabitable for a month whilst we do these works, depending on the scale of what it is.
Yeah, and I guess the first point that you raised there about getting that understanding is the bit that's incredibly hard to do.
Yeah.
So in general, our industry is built around people who sell stuff. So if you talk to an insulation company, you want to be fabric first, mate, get in the insulation, solid wall, yeah, it's fine, but you should always do the walls first. If you don't do the walls, the heat pump's not going to work, etc. I mean, none of this is true, by the way.
Yeah.
If you talk to a heat pump person, don't worry about the insulation, it's totally irrelevant, just put in the tech and you'll save a ton of money. If you talk to the solar guys, like, all that stuff's nonsense, just bang a load of solar panels on your roof, big old battery, you're in. So actually being able to understand what you should do, you can't get that from an EPC, because the EPC says a list of items in order, which are both nonsense in that the logic to them has been designed by committee base. It's just rubbish. And then
never been a massive fan of the EPCs
but they're changing it, which we'll come to in a minute. But in any event, the EPC point is stupid. But then if you look at it, so if you look at cavity wall insulation, for example, it will say cost £500 to £1,500. Now, the reason it uses that number, I hope that is the right number, but I'm pretty sure it is because that's the average when they did a survey in 2012 or whatever, because stuff is...
And we all know prices haven't changed at all since 2012.
Well, but it's not even that. That's an average. If you have a castle, it'll say that your cavity wall insulation will cost £500 to £1,500. So because we generally work with rich people, they're always like, but my EPC says this stuff will cost £1,000. You're saying it will cost £3,000. And I was like, yeah, because your house is more than 3 times bigger than the average property. It costs more. Equally, if your property is smaller, if you've got a terraced house rather than an end of terrace house, you have less wall, so your cavities are cheaper. So it's really hard. From EPC won't tell you what the price will be at all. It won't tell you. It'll give you a halfway decent view of the energy, but landlords, I won't say don't care about energy, but that's not necessarily the prime factor, because you don't get the benefit. If you put solar panels in, you don't connect that unless you've got a separate supply. You don't connect that to your own source. That's going to your tenants, and you can't mark up electricity. So there's a challenge at that. But even the EPC is done in order. So if it says solid floor insulation, which is madness, no one ever does solid floor insulation. They're taking up the floors anyway to put underfloor heating in. That's the only time anyone does it. But it's always like number 2 on the list if you've got solid floor. Then you can't actually read what the EPC implication of the next thing will be, because you've got that embedded in it, and they're not actually straight additive, they're done in combination. So the EPC is really unhelpful, and if you go to the market, they just tell you what they're selling. And even though the EPC model is being changed to the home energy model, I'm not convinced it's going to be any better. In fact, I'm pretty convinced it won't be. So what, of course, it's what we do, but what people actually need is to be able to say, well, if I did that and that, but not that, and actually for my house or my flat, given where what type of property I've got, how big it is, whatever, what can I do? And then, as you say, there's the overlay, which actually is quite hard to automate, which is, but I'm in an area 4 conservation area, or I'm listed. Actually, I mean, London you mentioned obviously has a lot of conservation areas, not as many listed properties. But that can be an added complexity. Although government, to be fair to it, I'm not often fair to it, but has made certainly heat pumps a little bit easier for houses, not for flats. It's really hard because of the noise regs, but they're going to change those. But solar panels are still a nightmare in conservation areas, and it's very dependent on your borough. Newham will let you put them on the front of facing the highway. Most others won't. Some object, even if that you could see it from squinting out of from half a mile away from some bit of public land. I've had a person in Liverpool where the conservation officer objected because if you stood in one 6-foot part of a park, you'd be able to see over 2 houses, their solar panels, and those 2 houses had unfinished breeze block garages, sky dishes, all sorts of things, and it's like, but over that crap, you could see 4 solar panels of this lady's array, which are in her back garden, and so I wrote in to the things. Well, this is Liverpool, and you've declared a climate emergency, etc. You should just let this through, and they did. Yeah. But I mean, it's just unnecessary, and if you have to do planning, that's depends. But even
the delightful complexities and nuances of our planning.
400 quid to submit your plan. You've got to get someone to do the drawings. I mean, you could do it yourself, but so it's listed buildings a couple of £1,000, planning it's £1,000, and that's non-trivial if what you're trying to do is put up £4,000 worth of solar panels.
Yeah,
that's like 20% of the total cost.
Yeah, it's insane, really. So how do you guys work in terms of this original consultancy? Because I think there's going to be a lot of agents and landlords who, like I said, they're wrapping their heads at the moment around Renters' Rights Act, but there's so much stuff coming to this industry. We've got Making Tax Digital starting to come in trenches from April, and then we've got things on the horizon. One of those is MEES, and landlords are starting to talk about this. So how do you guys? How does your kind of process work? Is it initial kind of paid for?
So it starts off being free. So you can just go to the website, which is genous.earth, and you can plug in your postcode and 10 bits of information, and we'll give you a rough estimate. So what it does is it builds, slightly fancy term, digital twin of your building, and it runs it through and says, these are if I change that thing, if I change that thing, what does it do? That model we use all the way through the journey, but it's a bit like if you've got at this point, it's like you've got a 4K TV and you're feeding it from a VHS video, if you remember those. So the panel is making up 90%, 5% of the pixels because VHS has really low resolution. So we're guessing a whole load of stuff at that point. And it does require an update, which will come in the next couple of weeks, but isn't there yet, to SAP 10, which the EPCs have just changed to. They changed to a bit earlier. So if you were looking at it to get a detailed view of your EPC rating, you should probably wait a couple of weeks, but it will be plus or minus, it'll be there. But to get that accurate, you've got to do an in-person survey. Yeah. You just have to. We effectively replicate the EPC survey and then we add stuff to it. So, and you get an EPC as part of that. But we've got all the data. So whereas if you just say, I live in a 1950s house, it might be a 1950s house, but it's got a 1990s extension on and a 2010 loft conversion. And
it's the old adage, like you call up a builder and go, I want to fit a new bathroom, and how much is that going to cost? And it's like,
Exactly. So with a survey, we take hundreds of measurements. We do all the stuff essentially that you do in an EPC, and we get your measurements for each room and radiators and so on. And then we build an automated report, which is more sophisticated than that sounds, but basically says, right, here's what you could do, long list of stuff, how much each of them we think roughly will cost, what you'd save, what the EPC benefit is, what the level of disruption is, background stuff, and then people and a recommended set of actions. And what people normally do there is to go either, I don't want to do anything, which is fine, they walk away, or I quite like that and that, but I don't want to do this, and I think that's going to be a bit more tricky, and the council's already told me I can't do this. And then you kind of build that in. We build that into a draft specification for all the bits with a costing on it, and then people pay us again. I mean, the first thing is like 150 quid. It's not huge, but they pay us again to get full design done. That's when we get people out to the property to dig holes in the walls if you're putting cavity wall insulation in, or take up the loft boarding, look at where does the plumbing run, how does stuff work, and then we build a set of quotes, which if you accept, obviously we deliver, and then you get that money you paid before back. So the idea is kind of what we've tried to do is to get as much information to people for as little as possible. It does string it out a bit. I mean, if I just charged you all the money up front, it would be quicker, but you don't pay much. You pay nothing at all to see the website, and it's a unique tool.
And obviously, again, I imagine this would vary depending on the size of property, but what typical kind of average cost would you look at for the in-person survey?
The in-person survey, the feedback and the report is all in £155, including VAT, unless your property is more than 250 square metres, because then the surveyors charge us more. But
a lot of properties will fall into that. I mean, that's
I mean,
UK property size like 80 square metres or something.
If you just bought an EPC, it would probably cost you, I don't know, £80, £100. This includes VAT. It's £150. We get more data. We actually do something useful with it. We generate a report. I mean, I press a button and it comes out. So we look at it and say, well, I wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't do that. And if I knew it was a landlord, and we do work with landlords, not nearly as often as owner-occupiers, obviously, but some people are like...
Well, that's about to change dramatically, I think.
Well, but what they want to do. So I've got one landlord, for example, we took an EPC F property to an EPC A.
Wow.
But it did cost 20,000 quid. And he was just like, this is what I want to do. I think he was a rich chap, and he wanted to make a good result for his tenants. We had another property of his, which was an EPC E. We only got it to a C because there was less room for solar panels. Couldn't do the walls. But I mean, the F was basically because it had electric heating, and that just kills you. In an EPC, if you've got electric heating or LPG, you're stuffed. So you kind of have to replace it.
There's been a big push to do electric-only developments. I mean, we're seeing it more and more.
So
and obviously, isn't government going to be getting rid of gas boilers in homes as well?
So the Future Home Standard, I don't think has come out yet, and that was definitely flip-flopped enough. And I don't do new builds, so the only thing we do with new builds is rip the solar panels off them and put proper ones on, which is very counterintuitive. We did a job in Yorkshire, big house, 2 little panels in. They'd obviously had to put 2 panels in to say that everything on the development had solar panels. So it was like, I think we put 16 panels on his roof.
Wow.
We actually had to take the 2 out, retile the thing. It's like, why couldn't you just done the job properly in the first place?
Yeah.
It's a nice house.
I mean, there's also interesting innovation. I'm fascinated by the solar roof tiles as well. I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, they're not there, and they're definitely not mainstream yet. But talking about the cosmetic element and the architectural cosmetic pushback, I do think that as long as you can still get. I don't believe they're as effective as the panels.
It's a great idea. I'm going to disagree with you because they don't, and with apologies to anyone who's going to correct me from the solar tile, whenever I've looked at them, the power output's terrible.
Yeah.
So the problem is it's a really niche product. Yeah. So it's similar to, and I don't want to go off too much of a tangent, but air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps. Ground source used to be the premium option. It was more efficient, whatever. But it only really works in massive houses. So obviously all the big companies have looked at R&D and gone, I'm putting it into air source because it's small and I can use it on anyone's property. So air source is now as efficient as ground source, even though it's got structural disadvantage in most cases. So it's a bit like, everyone gave up on plasma TVs because the Korean manufacturers just went, we're going to make 5 billion LEDs. And then plasma pioneer, and people just went, I can't compete with that. Our technology may be better, but I'm not going to try. Yeah. So I think there's a similar thing that solar panels are produced in such insane volume at a global level. We're now getting 495 watts a panel for a standard size panel. I put panels in my house in Wimbledon 2008 or 9, can't remember which. They were 230. So more than twice the power output. And the panels now, I can buy wholesale. I'm not going to tell you why I can buy them wholesale, but under £100.
Yeah. Wow.
And I don't want to think about what I paid for mine. I mean, I did it because I got feed-in tariffs and I wanted to do the right thing or whatever. Yeah. But my 2009 array was just rubbish.
Yeah.
A 2025 array just canes it.
Yeah.
So roof tiles, the only real time that they could work, I think, is in a listed building. But even in a listed building, I think it's going to be really difficult to say.
Yeah.
You know, we've got a listed client who has a 15th century manor house, but because he's got a 15th century manor house, we're putting 100 panels in a field down out of the way. We'd never try and put them on his beautiful house.
Yeah.
Because it's a beautiful house, and the planners would have, I mean, they're already kind of like, well, could you move them 10 meters further that way? But so for those kind of people, you just use big panels. But I think tiles probably, I'd say certainly if you're a landlord looking at how do I do stuff.
I wasn't necessarily playing that into it's a viable solution right now in this space. I just it's something interesting because the cosmetic element comes up a lot, whether it's planning or just purely cosmetic.
So in-roof solar is really interesting. Most people don't do. So that's when you take the tiles off and you recess the panels in, and effectively they're kind of flush. Particularly with like a slate roof, they can look really good because you've got just the thing runs across. The thing about in-roof, particularly again, if you're looking at something like, if you have to re-roof anyway, which, you know, periodically happens. So a square metre of slate, if you're going for slate, something like £55 a square metre. Solar panel is 1.97 square metres. So my panel is £100, your slate is £100 for the same amount of space before you've got the roofer in or whatever. So actually, by filling up a roof with solar panels, you can materially reduce your re-roofing costs. And you've got scaffolding up at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's a big cost because our panels have got really cheap, but scaffolders have not.
Yes.
Plumbers and electricians and scaffolders cost the same as they always did.
An interesting stat, a bit of a tangent, but I saw an interesting stat the other day. The fastest growing job in the US right now, both in terms of job opportunities but also increased pay, is electricians.
Well, I mean, electrification in general home electrification is becoming a big thing. Not just for
digitalisation of everything as well. I mean, it plays into everything, right?
You've got data. There's commercial side, but even residential. I mean, you've got like smart home technology. You've got LED lighting. People switching over, which is just more complex than the old incandescent bulb you just screwed in. I mean, electricians are busy. My home electrician, who's got nothing to do with my business, I've been trying to get since November to fix some stuff that's wrong. I just can't get him booked. He's like, I'm really sorry, Simon. I'm just super busy, and I'm sure he will be. It's one of the things we will come to about leaving stuff to the end is in 2029 or 2030 March. If you call someone up and say, I want to get some solar panels and some cavity wall insulation,
they'll laugh. They'll laugh. They'll be like,
I can do it on October the 2nd. I can do it, but not October the 1st, not for that. And that's the deadline. So actually, when you've got people, whereas right now, with the end of eco, which we talked about earlier, the market actually needs some business. Yeah. So now's the time I would suggest, to get decent prices. Plus, if you get an EPC now, up until I think it's 1st October 29, it will be valid for the next 10 years. If you wait until after the new EPC comes in, we don't know what that will look like. So it may be that what would have cost you £500 today will cost you £5,000 then, because the metrics will look different. Equally, of course, if it is going to cost you £10,000 today, maybe you want to wait and see if you can put in a new time of use electric boiler, because that might get allowed in, and that gets you through. So I'm not encouraging people to do stuff right now, but if you've got an easy solution or you've got established technologies that will do stuff, and particularly if you've got a tenant break, because a lot of what we do does require going inside the house. Well,
the trouble is, from 1st of May there are no tenant breaks.
Well, no, but I mean, if someone's leaves, so if you've got that next year that guy's out, schedule something in, as well as doing the kind of standard clean.
I think the preparation is actually even more important now, because at the moment landlords have a kind of known break. The challenge from the 1st of May onwards in the general rental market is that those breaks disappear. Tenancies become periodic and indefinite. So unless a landlord sells or reoccupies, they cannot serve notice.
Right.
Other than a breach of contract.
Yep.
Whereas a tenant can, which is why, not only is it good business sense to get prepped now to understand cost-wise, but also, as we touched on earlier, understanding logistically what that work looks like. But to have that so that, the idea might be to plan to do those works in 2028.
Yeah.
but you have a tenant serve notice late 2027, you go, do you know what?
I'm going to get it done.
I'm just going to get it done.
Yeah.
I know what the cost is. Let's get it done. It's locked in, and then I don't have this problem. I mean, some landlords at the same time might turn around and go, well, if a tenant's in and it's large scale works and the tenants are like, I'm not moving out and I can't live in an uninhabitable home, and the landlord will go, well, fine, well, the tenant's not letting us do the works,
Yep,
and that
and
exempts us
that's
from...
an exemption. Yeah, but indeed, but if the tenant then turns around and says, no, I do want that stuff, it's because the other thing about minimum energy efficiency standards is although there's a piece of paper that says, or a digital record that says EPCC, for the most part, the way EPCs work is they are designed to reflect the cost of occupation, which is why big houses is very hard to get to EPCC unless you've got big solar arrays, just because they're more expensive to run because they're big, and why little flats are generally, particularly modern ones, are generally A or B. So, a tenant might well say, well, actually, that stuff that you're going to do is going to save me money. They might say, I don't want a heat pump because I've heard Nigel Farage saying that they're the devil's work. I'm not sure that he has said that, by the way, but if he were to say it. But
let's not forget, I mean, we've got, 97% of the world scientists agreeing on climate change, on man-made climate change, and 3% not, and there's a lot of people who are very happy to go with the 3%.
It's way more than 97%. That was because they did, I've actually read some papers on this, that they originally, people, there was a period where they did all these reviews where people didn't explicitly say climate change is a real thing.
Yeah.
So all academics a few years ago were told, if you're writing in the field of climate change science, your first sentence effectively has to be, there is no doubt about anthropogenic climate change, because then they didn't get, it wasn't 3% disagreed, it was 3% didn't state an opinion.
Yeah.
But
I mean, even sticking to that metric,
whether you believe in climate change or not, I mean, the good thing about an intelligent retrofit, which is the term we call it, is you save money.
Yeah.
So, what I generally say, not in the landlord market, but the owner-occupied market, is if you've got the funds to do it, the only reason not to do this stuff is if you hate the planet more than you like making money. And if you stop and think about how many people, even Donald Trump likes making money more than he hates the planet.
Yeah.
So actually most people just go, and we have plenty of clients who are millionaires who just go, 10% post-tax.
There is a messaging to landlords on this as well, because the traditional rental model is that you charge rent for the property and the tenant pays the bills. Of course, there is a different way to do this, whereas you make your property more efficient and you rent your property all inclusive with utilities, which is permitted.
Yeah, so I think you will know more than rules than I do. So you're not allowed to mark up utilities, but you are allowed.
You can't mark up utilities, but you can offer an all-encompassing service.
The challenge on that is just that it then doesn't incentivize people to be careful with what they.
Yeah, although I know people who've got reasonable use caps within their tenancy agreement.
But even
they
if
look
you
at historical usage in the property.
Yep.
Most of the properties we've got check-in and check-out meter readings for all the utilities. A lot of our properties we've handled for at least 10 years, if not our 22 years of operation. So we know what average energy usage looks like in 90% of our stock. So we don't do this at the moment, but we talked about it when bills spiked, and also during COVID when we were looking at ways to kind of simplify things. We did explore quite a lot of this, and we were like, well, if we wanted to do it ethically, which is how we approach everything as an agency, we were like, there's got to be wins for both sides, but there's got to be transparency and the fair usage thing. We were like, really the fairest way, when we've got 4 properties that we have that data for, which is the vast majority of ours, we can go, look, we've managed this for 10 years. Energy usage over that 10 years is X, and we could even apply that to go, well, these 5 years there was one person living there, and these other 5 years there was a couple living there, and we could even,
So you can do it. I think that the challenge is, first of all, that people can just say, well, the last people might have been happy to live in 18 degrees, but
I mean, it's also exposure.
I'm not.
Right? You're also at the risk of what happens with utility costs.
I was going to say, the second thing is you've got, bills have changed dramatically in the last few years, and it's an exposure that I think is quite risky. The third thing is that I was talking to someone, I'm not going to name who they were, but they gave me the number of what, and they should know, the current energy debt is in the UK of unpaid bills, and I'm not going to say exactly how much because it's probably confidential information, but it's several £billion that we owe as a collective group to our energy companies.
Yeah.
So the alternative view, and again, I'm not advocating for this, but is to say if you put up, for example, a 4 kilowatt peak solar panel array on your MCS certificate, which you'll get because that's what you have to do, it will say, the expected production of this is 3,200 units per year, 3,200 kilowatts hours per year. Depends on the angle, where you're located.
Yeah.
As you say, Scotland, Pontypool, Mayfair are not the same. But on that basis, you know what that tenant is getting as a benefit. And to the extent that over time you can think through that on your rental strategy. Here is a rental that will cost you £500 less to run per year, because British Gas or Octopus or whoever is going to give you 15p back at the minimum for what you don't use. So even if you use nothing at all, you can tell that £3,200 is worth 3,200 units, sorry, is worth 450 quid. And if you use it all yourself at 27p, then it's worth, I can't do the maths in my head, £700.
Yeah.
So actually this rental, I'm not going to charge you for that. It's absolutely yours.
Yeah.
But this is a more valuable property.
Yeah.
And it's warmer, it's got better radiators. So a lot of what, the mindset that we're trying to sell to an owner occupier, which is make your property better, more comfortable, warmer, lower cost to run, higher compliance, whatever, more valuable. That one's really tricky to prove, by the way. Unfortunately, I wish it were true, but unfortunately it's not obvious that this stuff makes your property more valuable to sell. Although for buy-to-let landlords, the Nationwide did some quite interesting analysis that did say that EPCs...
The argument would be it's more desirable.
Yeah, so what the estate agents all say to us is that you can sell an energy efficient house property more quickly, but not for necessarily more money.
Yeah.
So there'll be somebody who just goes, I don't care, I want a solid stone 18th century barn and I kind of want to put an Aga in it and to live like that. That's my call.
Yeah.
But there'll be a load of other people who just go, I am not touching that because it's an EPCF and its bills are going to be £5,000 a year, and I'll buy the slightly newer building that's got lots of glass in it and is different and is going to cost me £1,000 to run.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at two properties that are equivalent in a situation where you've got a street and one's got solar panels and double glazing and insulation and big radiators and a heat pump and a battery, that's probably going to be the property you'd rather buy than the one that is a fixer-upper, unless you're in the market for a fixer-upper.
Yeah.
But those are going to be hard to rent anyway, because those are typically owner-occupiers who don't do anything with their properties for a long period of time. So I think there's a strategy, as you say, of what do I think about for my properties? Do I lock in a new EPC tomorrow or in 2 years' time or whatever, because I know I'm 64 points and I can see that all I have to do is this and this. We had a landlord about a year ago who cavity wall would just tip him up. This was before Mies had even happened, and his tenants didn't want any interior works, but we got permission that we'd scaffold and we'd do the cavity wall from outside. Tenant never actually opened the door to us. We just
Job done.
Turned up, did the work. So you've got different things that you could do. You're not going to be able to take up a floor when you've got someone in the property, because you have to take everything out of it.
Yeah.
But the good news is floor insulation kind of never makes sense unless you've got, back to London, if you've got an exposed basement or something, you can do it from there. But taking up floors, sure, if you're going to do it, think about adding to it. Make sure you get evidence, because EPCs will only count what you can evidence, whether it's building regs or certificates. So if you say, oh yeah, I did that ceiling, but I did it myself and then I put plaster on it, they'll go uninsulated, brackets assumed, and you've got nothing for it. Yeah. So always make sure that you've, I would say this, of course, employed someone to do stuff, or at least got evidence that it's been done. Yeah. And then choose. Do you do it now? Do you do it later? Do you look at it now and think this is really painful? I might exit the property. I might move on. There's obviously an exemption if the property's worth less than £100,000 on the £10,000 piece, but not many are. So for most people, if they just think, I really don't want to do this, maybe don't put it on the market in July 2029, 2030, sorry, because there'll be a whole load of other EPCD properties on the market at that point, and there won't be that many owner occupiers wanting to move. So think about your strategy and plan what you want to do, because it will be different for everyone.
Yeah, interesting. Well, look, I think it's been a really fascinating chat. I'm aware that you've got another meeting to get to. I mean, I'm really interested. It's been fascinating to learn a little bit more. And like I said, you know, our wheelhouse, we always kind of look at a lot of things through the lettings lens, the residential lettings lens, but also generally prop tech. Anything around that is really exciting. But I think it's a really interesting kind of time for what you're offering. I mean, you know, literally sat here listening to you, I've been like, well, you know, we can start. We've already got a list of like our worst offenders, you know, ones that are red flagged, ones that are amber flagged. And, you know, I'm already in my head, great, we can start going through the free online digital twin assessment to begin with. And then we can start the conversations with landlords about getting the new EPC survey done with those works and start building that picture. Really, really interesting. And I think, you know, for a lot of people listening to this, I think MEES and energy efficiency within our sector is something that, you know, like I said, we're aware of, and it's been constantly bubbling away in the background. And whatever your position is on energy efficiency and the green economy and everything else, from a political or social standpoint, as an industry, this is something that is categorically coming down the line. But I think at the moment, there is a lot of confusion. I absolutely loved your point about, you know, if you approach each of these entities directly, your cavity wall insulation, your air pumps, whatever, there is that, you know, they are there to sell a product and a service, and the nature of the beast is they're probably going to poo-poo everything else because they desperately want you to buy what they're selling. I think, you know, absolutely, I can absolutely see the value in an entity like yourselves that can help facilitate that work, but fundamentally at the start is here to go, here are all your options, and like you said, here's the kind of improvement basis, here's our approximate cost to implement it. And I think, you know, whether you're an agent advising a client or whether you're a landlord trying to wrap your head around this at the moment, that's a huge win in terms of just having that kind of autonomy and that transparency on what their options are, what the realities of that, like I said, cost and results wise, and a better understanding of the impact of on the property, on a potential tenancy, etc., etc. So it's a lot of it is just about preparation and planning. You know, with a lot of these things. So really exciting. I'm really glad you came in today. It's been fascinating to learn a lot more about Genous and your journey. And yeah, I'm definitely pretty much off the back of this, I'm going to be briefing our property management team to start having a tinker. So yeah, guys, hopefully you found that interesting as well. I will drop a link in when this goes live, but it is Genous, Genous.
OUS, AI, right? .earth. AI will try and autocorrect it because it doesn't believe we're a word, but please resist the urge. Yeah, Genous.earth.
Yeah, so go on, have a look, check it out. I'm going to start playing with the digital twins almost immediately, start seeing what we get back. And yeah, if you know, whatever you find, give us some feedback. It'd be great to hear what people see. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you in. Thank you so much. Guys, thanks ever so much for joining us again, and hopefully catch up soon. All the best. Bye.